Thank you. Thank you for coming. So, Andrew, that's you over there, isn't it, Woody? So, Andrew Kavasilas is Secretary of the Hemp Party. Been here in Nimbin probably 20 years. Had a licence to grow cannabis and import and sell seeds, and been a really hard worker on the paperwork and the forms and the government stuff I can barely read. So really appreciate him here to talk. He will know anything you want to know technically on government bits, and he's one of the few people who's been saying for a long time, look, no one can do this legally because we're all locked into treaties, UN treaties, and his explanations will make a lot of sense why everyone keeps hedging. They keep saying we'll do this and then suddenly they can't because they come up against these walls. We've all signed these bloody treaties. And because we grow so much opium, which is a special favour with the UN, I think we're even very scared to break the rules. But he will tell you more. Cheers.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks everyone for coming and still hanging in here. It's been a pretty good day. First time we've had a seminar workshop down here. It's a pretty good venue. Yeah, so Michael's kind of right. When we're talking about the treaties, we're tied in. So what's basically happening here, and probably even the setting here, is happening all over the world. I would guarantee that there's seminars like this because the Australian people, the government, we're all in the same boat. There is no medicines around the world that have been approved that can be prescribed to patients, only the spray from England, which is a bit of a red herring, and we'll talk about that and what it looks like. But, you know, what's happening in the US, again, what Michael and Kathleen have just come back from. Yeah, Michael said something about the public referendums. What they have in America is, you know, under their constitution, they have citizens-initiated referendums. And so this has started back in 1996 in California, where the first medical cannabis regime took off. But that involves people getting a petition. You know, a group like whoever gets a petition, gets enough signatures, and at the next election, the people get to vote on different propositions. And every time there's an American election in the different states, there's all sorts of different questions. The medical cannabis ones always come up, and the people have voted yes. So what's actually happened, the government and the medical profession were bypassed. But what we've come up with is basically a situation where in some states in the US you can get an exemption to smoke pot. That's what you've just saw there. And it's pretty much the same in Canada. There is more like a medical cannabis regime rather than a pharmaceutical medicine prescription product that's been clinically trialled. But that's all the governments can do. So all the law changes here that the federal government's been talking about, and even some of the state governments, really, that's the only option that are given to companies. Now, and again, a lot of this stuff, I hope it just puts, you get an understanding of the context in which we're all, most all countries in the world are in the same boat. There is no prescription medicine. Governments are talking about changing laws that would allow companies to come and develop medicines that would be clinically trialled and then be able to be prescribed, and then everyone's happy then, the AMA and everything. The hold-up is really at the UN level, and it's like opium. In fact, if you look up the laws under the UN drug conventions about medical cannabis, and it does have them there, and it says, it just refers you to the laws on opium. And opium, I suppose the other big realisation for us is that governments don't own cannabis, nor do they own opium. Companies do. So our government can't grow, can't do this, can't develop product because they don't own it. And in the world, there's only a very tiny, minuscule number of companies that actually own cannabis that would be lawfully recognised under the UN that could be used for medical or scientific purposes around cannabis. Most of those companies, like in Canada or even some in the US and even in the Netherlands and Israel, they're not totally recognised under the UN. There is one company though, there was Monsanto, there was always a company that owned it. Just like there's 3 or 4 companies that own opium, there's always been one, but more recently Bayer is the only lawful source of cannabis in the world. And Monsanto prior to them, for about 60 odd years, they grew cannabis at the University of Mississippi, and sometimes we'll hear references to the University of Mississippi. And then that cannabis is grown and distributed through a US agency called NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And you sometimes see that name come up. That is traditionally the only lawful source of cannabis for medical and scientific research. Here in Australia, there's been lots of research organisations that have accessed cannabis from there. But there's a really great quote from a spokesperson from NIDA back in 2010 that said, "We only supply and fund research into the negative consequences of its use." And that's true. That's exactly what they do. That's what they've always done. So, any larger amounts or any research into medical cannabis or medical uses or medical benefits of cannabis have really been stifled. A lot of research groups around the world can access individual cannabinoids through other research groups, like in Israel and even from the US, so they can buy single cannabinoids and take them away, and you'll see references for, cannabis curing cancer and cannabis doing this and cannabis doing that, and there's patents on this and that. But when you really look into it, it's really just individual cannabinoids that have been generally in vitro, in test tubes or something like that. Sometimes there's mice trials or something like that, but really nothing that translates to any future or development of a product that can be prescribable, because that's what we're talking about when I'm talking about the government. When the government talks, that's what they're talking about. They're basically saying you can't use a whole cannabis or a whole cannabis extract if you can get a lawful source of it. They're saying you have to find the active ingredient that you're talking about, one of the cannabinoids, and the condition that you say will treat, and then put them together and do the clinical trials. This is the stuff that governments always say, or health ministers, whenever there's a new medical discovery, they say, well, it might take 5 to 10 years before it gets to the public, and it's going to cost a lot of money. Basically, a company has to know that they're going to get their money back on it. So, I hope I'm stitching this context together, that it is very difficult, and this is happening all around the world in terms of trying to get a meaningful medical cannabis regime. I mean, the fact is, there is no government in the world that has willingly introduced a meaningful medical cannabis regime. And that's why we're in this situation now. And when governments talk about here in Australia, where you can go to your doctor and get a prescription. Well, even if you went through all the rigmarole, all you're really able to get is this product from England called Sativex. It's a spray. And the development of that really should illustrate what I'm talking about. It's like a red herring. So about 15 or more years ago, the British government allowed one company, GW Pharmaceuticals, to access seed, cannabis, high THC cannabis seed from the black market, to start growing, to develop a company, to float it on the stock exchange. I think they've received oversubscription, but they're well over $100 million pounds in investment. But the government let this one company develop to do all this, and then develop one product, a spray, Sativex, for the treatment of MS. But that product, in the meantime, has been dangled in front of every time the debate comes up here in Australia. Governments say, well, we'll get Sativex in, we'll do clinical trials using this and that. And not just Australia, lots of governments around the world do the same. And I'd say for at least the last 15 years, Sativex has just been used as a scapegoat, as a sort of a stopgap measure, even where governments have been pushed and have had to bring some in. It's very, very expensive. It comes in 5.5ml bottles, and it's over $250 a bottle. This is a very cheap product to make. There's probably 20 cents worth of cannabis in it. And Bayer, I should just point out, Bayer back in the day when GW first floated, Bayer actually paid £15 million for the distribution rights into Oceania, which is us, of this product. And no intention of ever distributing it here unless it gets onto our PBS, and I believe at the moment they are in discussions with the Federal Health Department to get this highly expensive product to be put on the PBS. And it's not even that good. We talk about CBD and THC. I believe in the history of medical uses of cannabis, the 5,000 years we talk about, it's always been high THC. We know about low THC, we know about those low THC industrial varieties that do display high CBD components in them. What we don't have there is any historical evidence that they were used for medicine. We know that countries fought wars to get hemp. It was all coming from Northern Europe and Ukraine. We fought wars to get that hemp so we could make sales and run our navies and merchant vessels to go down to the Middle East to bring back opium and hashish, the high THC indica, to take back and to be used and distributed around the world for medicine. Coca, opium, and opium, coca, and hashish, they were the medicines. They were the three medicines. And there, if you have a look, if anyone takes the time to have a look at the formulation of the UN drug conventions, that's what they were built on. There was 8 companies given the rights to use opium, basically given a monopoly on world payment, still going on to this day. But yeah, so that's basically in a nutshell what's happening here in Australia. Our governments are saying, they want to do things, but when you really bear in mind, and it's common sense, that governments don't own cannabis, so it's the companies that do it, and all the government can do is put laws in place and regulations in place for those companies to maybe come here and produce a product. And I should just point out that the government here has said, in spite of all the law changes here, when we talk about a lawful source of starting for the foundation source of high THC cannabis for a company, these laws will not legitimise any high THC cannabis for a company to even start with. And so when they were asked questions about that, this is the Office of Drug Control, this is the government department that's been established by the government to oversee the introduction of medical cannabis or the development of therapeutic cannabinoid medicines, and I think that's once we understand that distinction as well. Medical cannabis is what's happening in these countries where you get an exemption to smoke pot, and it's working very well, obviously. But the therapeutic cannabinoid medicines is what this government here in Australia is offering, and the legislation and regulations that would allow companies to do that. But at the same token, there are no Australian companies that have a lawful source of high THC cannabis. There are companies that have lawful sources of low THC cannabis, but it's a start, and so hopefully companies will go off in that direction as well. Bearing in mind, there's also proprietary. If you don't, you've got to try and throw that into the mix as well. Who owns those seeds? Who benefits from it? Where did they come from? There's all of that, and any farmer will tell you it's the same around. Wheat and corn and everything, you pay royalties, somebody owns that, someone developed that variety, and there's still research facilities around the world still trying to develop the perfect grain of wheat, the perfect corn, so that's still going on. So there's a lot of proprietary, once we talk about governments and companies and doing everything legal and all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, that's where we fall into. So that's the kind of regulations the government has got us into. Other questions that were asked of the Office of Drug Control, what companies are there available in the world that could even come here, that can do this? And they said companies from perhaps Canada, Israel and the Netherlands. So that's where we're kind of at the will of that. Now, and again, you have to bear in mind that in those countries, even in America, in spite of all this over-the-counter cannabis, there has been no products developed, clinically trialled, available for prescription. There really is just an exemption to smoke pot, and it's the same in Canada. In fact, there's even regulations that are so strict over there, it's going to be, if our government can bend enough laws, and the Canadian government can bend enough laws to allow any kind of export into Australia, in other words, Australia giving some legitimacy, international legitimacy to these other companies, these companies would love to come here and use our laws to develop a clinically trialled product that could be prescribable. So I haven't put too fine a edge on it or haven't confused people that much about it, but that's kind of it around cannabis. It's simple, but it's complex. Governments don't own it, companies do. Most of the companies that do, most all aren't recognised internationally. The ones that is, like Bayer, not interested in doing anything really big. Bayer is also with GW Pharmaceuticals behind the paediatric epilepsy trial, which is based in the US, I should say. So this is a clinical trial that's been set up to use a whole cannabis extract to treat the symptoms of Dravet syndrome, a very rare syndrome in the paediatric epilepsy spectrum. So, just like in Australia, there's all these governments around the world telling the people that we're about to legalise medical cannabis by getting a number of children onto this trial that's based over in the US. So, you know, you can see how slow this goes. Even, you know, we go back 15 odd years to the development by the same company, GW Pharmaceuticals and Sativex, and now the development, you know, which was developed just for MS, and so it's very hard to use it for other things now. There's a clinical trial using it for treatment of chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting and so forth. But the product itself, I mean, it was obviously it was developed for MS. It's a 1-to-1, which is almost equal parts of CBD and THC. It's obviously not an optimal product that you'd be using for someone going through chemo and the side effects associated with that. So whether it's been set up to fail or not, but that's the only thing that's available. So, you know, these things just take so many years. And if we're talking about MS and a small patient group like Gervais, this is going to take a long time before we get to the other symptoms and other conditions. But I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about medical. I do want to talk about industrial hemp seed food, and again, in the same way where governments are being dictated to and being influenced. Here in Australia, we're the only country not allowed to eat hemp seed food. We're also the only country that are using saliva tests, the random roadside saliva tests that we see. That strategy, it's only here. Many, many years ago, these companies involved in saliva testing tried to introduce them to the world. The reports all said they're not recommended. They can't be, they're unreliable, and all sorts of things like that. It was only the state of Victoria that tried them on. Look, it's a flawed system, and it's a flawed strategy. We said a while ago, and in fact got quoted, that, you know, this would actually influence drug use trends to the worst, and we're seeing that now where, you know, these devices and the manner of testing unfairly target cannabis, because cannabis stays in the system. It's not like a powder and pill, which is like alcohol. Your body can purge it very quickly. It's a poison. Your body's getting rid of it. Cannabis, your fat cells will hang on to it for a rainy day and will metabolise very slowly. It's something that's not a poison. Your body wants it. So, you know, that kind of thing and that strategy has affected drug use trends. But what it's also done is stop the introduction of hemp seed food in Australia. And we just heard the other week that the Food Standards Authority down in Canberra have again approved this food. They've checked everything out. It all should be good. What usually happens, whether it's a chemical or a new GMO grain or whatever, when FSANZ, Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, when they approve it, the board of FSANZ approve it, it goes for a vote to the COAG, which is FOFRA, the Forum on Food Regulations. It's a group of ministers from all the Australian states, health ministers from the Australian states and territories as well as New Zealand, and they vote on it. Unfortunately, with cannabis, with hemp seed food, it's been going since about 2000. It's been approved 3 times, but what happens when it gets to the forum, the health ministers, it's always been rejected and a long drawn-out process that have taken many, many years. The influence on police, on their health ministers in here at a state-by-state basis has become quite evident. We've done a few Freedom of Information searches, and we found that to be the case. So we know that besides the context I was talking about with medical cannabis and the rest of the world, we also have this influence of police at a micro level, and especially where it relates now to the saliva test. And we can't overlook the influence of police and saliva tests as it affects the introduction of medical cannabis will be very important. It's another fight we'll be having in the future if we don't sort it out sooner rather than later. Our road fatalities have got worse, whereas, you know, in these states, in the US and Canada, where, you know, although the government didn't approve and the medical profession didn't approve, we're watching these unintended positive consequences, and not just around road fatalities. It's around alcohol consumption, alcohol abuse, antisocial behaviour, domestic violence, mental health issues, all these positive unintended consequences which, you know, are really adding up now. We go for almost a harm maximisation regime where, you know, we've got these saliva tests which are changing drug use trends to the worst. I'm not blaming ICE on you know, its popularity and its acceptance more and more because people are avoiding cannabis. But we do know that cannabis is the one that's always unfairly targeted. And in a couple of sniffer dogs in with that, cannabis is smelly. It's not like powders and pills. It's hard to conceal. When you use it, it smells. It's not a quickly pop something into your mouth. So we, you know, as a movement and as a lobby group, Hemp Embassy and Hemp Party, we always put our flag on the wall and said, you know, yeah, your strategies are for harm maximisation. So yeah, with medical and industrial, we're seeing, you know, it's hard to really get good momentum going forward. And sometimes it's not even up to the politicians. The politicians come and go. It's the big pharma that are always there. There's a lot of health lobbyists that, you know, can certainly circumvent ministers and even public servants and bureaucrats, and, you know, just reminding them of you know, what their obligations are under UN drug treaties to keep this down, to make sure we do it by the book if you're going to do it. You know, cannabis has to be from a lawful source. So, although you're reading a lot of headlines, the rest of the world thinks medical cannabis is legal here in Australia. They've read the headlines. You know, we get stuff from England, Sativex for instance, so we assume that, well, geez, England must have a meaningful cannabis regime, but they don't. It's very hard. And recreational, well, that's the really tough one. But what we have seen is where medical cannabis has been approved under whatever conditions in other countries, recreational does piggyback it. But again, that's where we're getting the real, you know, in terms of social positive unintended consequences. That's where they're coming. And you know, Michael and Kathleen would have seen where in the States and in Canada where there has been a liberalisation of cannabis laws, there's kind of a distinction drawn between people who use cannabis and people who use other drugs. And it does it by itself. And they kind of are different people. And we know that. We see it ourselves. So overall, I think we're going all right in Australia, but we have to maintain the push. And especially if you bear in mind what I've been saying and understand that it's not a state issue, medical cannabis, it really is a federal, international issue that we really need to push our state ministers, to push the federal ministers. We have to get on that right footing where we're not talking much more about why cannabis should be made legal for medical purposes. We should be talking about why isn't it, and putting time frames and timelines on what government is proposing. You know, I mean, for us in our movement, what we're talking about, we're trying to find, you know, in a more timely manner, address the needs and concerns of an increasingly significant number of Australians who are using cannabis every day for medical purposes. And so we have to maintain that push and just be like an opposition. I definitely am now, especially when I read reports in the newspaper about what a government's saying. I want to know more details. Every time we go looking for more details, they're found lacking, or, you know, double speak through the media, which we still find ourselves in the same situation. There's been premiers that have held Lucy Haslam's hand, you know, 3 years ago, saying, "I want to help you out," and they're gone, and there's a new premier, and that's been going on. As a movement and as a lobby group, we've seen that for 20-odd years. But it's hard for us sometimes too. We have to suffer the stigma of cannabis use and cannabis, you know, all sorts of cannabis use. So, you know, we definitely do feel the stigma of that. And when governments do find someone to talk to, someone to be the public face of medical cannabis, they do rather prefer someone who doesn't know this kind of stuff, and someone who will look good in the camera for them and not ask too many questions and be thankful that a minister or a premier is even talking to them. And, you know, the politician has done their job and they've reassured the public. There were many instances of mums who have really pestered governments and got little bits of crumbs, and, you know, they've been quite thankful for it. But when the government explains that little crumbs that they've given to one person, when they explain it to the public or through the media, it sounds like it's a wholesale manoeuvre or you know, large progress that's been made, when in fact it hasn't. So we have to watch out what we read about that, and I'm going to cut it a bit short. Usually I like to talk about even, you know, people that are searching for medical cannabis, and you guys, well, you're here, you found medical cannabis if you need it, but for a majority of people who are using cannabis now, they're finding it on the web, and there's a lot of charlatans and snake oil sellers and people who are really just selling, you know, very low dose things or nothing at all for really high prices. We're worried about that. And again, as a movement, if no one else will talk about it, we have to. We notice it and we do pass on information when we can. And we take here and take complaints about other groups and that starting around. And we you know, around here we try and keep it as best and as hippie as we can. I'll take questions now, I suppose, if anybody's got any. Yes.
It strikes me that Big Pharma, that's true what everybody believes, that if they can't make big bucks out of it easily, they'll squash it. True. But more than that, they have the slickest lobby groups that's ever been invented.
Yep.
And they have vast big data now feeding them, and they never close down because they're international. And while it's midnight here, it's midday somewhere else. Yeah. And Bayer or anybody, they're awake and they're working while everybody else here and everybody you've ever met is asleep.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that the answer is, if you meet a big angry dog, the only way to beat it really is be a bigger dog. So what can be done? Could you criticise, please, for and against what is being done and what could be done to get basically just a slicker, more efficient lobby group together, and how does it get money? I'm not exactly a Luddite, but I've never had a credit card, I've never had a computer or anything, but I know that you can raise money, and money, as vile as it might be, is a good tool to have in the armoury of a lobby group. So how can more money be got for a slicker lobby group? I don't mean bad people, I just mean stronger.
I don't know, but you know, a lobby group, look, and a lot of these things, and that's a totally fair enough question. What I do always ask myself is, well, why hasn't that happened somewhere else? Why hasn't any other country done it? Look, when we talk about Big Pharma and cannabis and them getting their hands on it, they have. And they've always had it. They've always had it. Yeah.
Is it possible to have, say, Bayer? Imagine Bayer Australia, Bayer America, Bayer Ecuador, Bayer Antarctica, you know, whatever it is, it's an amalgam of companies, each having a lobby group. So would it be possible to identify lobby groups in all of, perhaps only the Western countries, because they're the ones that lead the world in point of fact. Would it be possible to have an amalgam of lobby groups so that then the pro-lobby groups, well, they're a stronger lobby group locally in Australia or any other place, because they're to be more feared, because the governments in the end, if they were leading and if they had a vision, well, when Big Pharma's lobby group arrived at their office, they'd say, no, we don't want to hear from you.
They're already there. You've got to understand, these companies have direct, they got their direct pipeline into every government.
They're in the office.
No, they got direct link and tap into every government's GDP, gross domestic product, through their health budgets. Governments spend a lot. These companies, you can have a look at the top 100 or 200 entities in the world. There's pharmaceutical companies that have more money than most countries.
Yes, right.
A company like GlaxoSmithKline, who grow half of the Australian opium crop. When I met them last day, their bloke was telling me they turn over $31 billion a year and $8 billion of that is profit. And by the end of the conversation, the guy said, look, if any company ever does look like they're going to get anywhere, we'll buy them up or do something. And that's what Bayer did, effectively, with GW Pharmaceuticals. But like I said, that was a red herring. But what it did do was provide 15 odd years worth of grace to lots of countries around the world by, you know, saying we're going to use Sativex, and that's still being used. And I should just say that Sativex was talked about in depth in the Greens put on the regulator bill, and there was an inquiry part of that. There was a unanimous, you know, all cross park benches, and everyone loved it. But in the final report of that regulator bill, they did highly criticise the product Sativex, and it's wasted a lot of time in parliamentary inquiries, both at the federal level and at state level. It's far too expensive. We could be making it here. It's never going to work unless it gets on the PBS, things like that. So, you know, and it really is one of the easiest, you know, 20-cent medicines you could ever make. But it's going to be, you know, worth hundreds and hundreds per little bottle to the company, to Bayer that owns it. And yeah, so that's, you know, in a nutshell, I said it is that. But there was an interesting thing about lobbyists. I mean, when you talk about lobbyists, that's one thing. Lobby companies, that's something else. Those lobby companies are owned by political parties. They have a stable of ex-politicians and ex-party people who run and do that and just get paid big bucks off big companies to be the go-between. You know, that's a whole other thing. Obama, during the formulation of Obamacare, he let a snippet come out. He said something like, for every member of Congress in the US, there was 22 lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industries. So that's how strong they are, and the money they get from governments, not just here in the US, but especially Western nations. It's clear that they earn a lot of money. And it was interesting, in around June this year, just before the election, there was an ex-New South Wales Liberal politician, Jackie Kelly, that obviously was disgruntled with the Liberal Party. And she was on the Oz Channel News, the Sky Channel News, and being interviewed, and she said, oh, the most corrupt government is the New South Wales government, and they're just run by lobby companies and this and that. And the presenter said, well, which companies are these? And straight off the bat, she said, Johnson & Johnson and Merck. So we know that they're there, but look, on the other hand, I still think that there is very many positives, and I'm in a business now that, you know, with a medical cannabis company, thankfully, I've got a job, and, you know, in terms of the positives that we can do, I'm, you know, my company, we're prepared to go along with what the laws and work within the legal framework and the regulations that the government has provided. But as we do that, we hope to show that how long-term they are, how much time we'll have to waste, how much wasted money there'll be, and that, you know, the pursuit of therapeutic cannabinoid medicines shouldn't be at the expense of a medical cannabis regime coming in a lot more timely manner that will address those needs of the people who need it now. And I'm talking about medical cannabis, not the medicines that they want to prescribe. There'll never be a stage, and we still don't have that situation where doctors, even in Israel, especially in Israel and Canada and the US, doctors aren't prescribing cannabis or cannabinoid medicines. They're giving you an exemption to smoke it. And doctors, by rights, because this product isn't been tested, or, you know, their insurer can't cover them if they were, and that's, you know, they can't cover them if they were, the doctor was to suggest somebody should use cannabis. If something happens to that person, that doctor will be liable. And that's the bottom line, and that's what the AMA here in Australia and medical associations around the world maintain that. And if you really listen to Israeli doctors and American doctors and who do the rounds, and even Canadian, they will tell you the medical professions in those countries have not adopted medical cannabis. It is very hard to find a doctor who will prescribe or even sign off on an exemption. Michael will tell you, in those dispensaries in the US, you go on Skype and you pay $100 or $150 to some quack doc who's going to say that, yeah, your headache warrants the use of medical cannabis. The regular doctors will not prescribing it, and they, at the most, what they're doing is providing you an exemption to use it if you can find the right doctor. So we have to really look into what people are saying, what the media says, and what's actually happening on the ground, translate that over here. And once we understand that, especially in the international context, I think that's when the debate will really hot up here in Australia. We'll start hearing terms like lawful source, the UN Drug Convention, that it isn't happening anywhere in Australia. Australia willingly doing something. That's the kind of language we will be looking for. That will, I think, signal real changes and meaningful changes here in Australia. But in the meantime, it's obvious the government is turning a blind eye, and the authorities and police in all sorts of jurisdictions are turning a blind eye to medical cannabis use in Australia, which is gladly and thankfully happening. And there, I say, an increasingly significant number of people are using it every day, and that must be, or taking some burden off our health budgets and other social budgets. And I think as that rolls out, we'll see more of that. But yeah, we must maintain the rage, keep fighting. It's a must. And don't believe the papers. And when people say, well, medical cannabis is legal, remind them it's not. It is actually not. The governments are lying. There's a lot of stuff on the net that you just wouldn't believe. I find it hard when I meet medical cannabis advocates and lobbyists who don't doubt anything that's said about cannabis, especially about the medical properties of it. I mean, it's the other thing too, what lets us down. There's people out there who, think that the jury's already made a decision that cannabis does cure cancer. Well, it's not. And no one's really been able to, with all the success stories that are purported to be around the country and around the world, I'm yet to see any gallery of people standing there with 2 MRIs, one with cancer and one without, with a full testimonial saying that I didn't use anything, I just used cannabis and got rid of cured my cancer. What I do read is that people have gone to surgery, they've gone to radiotherapy, they've done their chemo and they used cannabis, and it was the only thing that helped them. And 2 people go through the same conditions, same prognosis. The one using cannabis will generally do a lot better than the one not using. And cannabis as a therapeutic agent, that's how it works. It may not cure anything, but it will help and have beneficial beneficial modalities in the human body that do bring an overall benefit to you when you do use it, and that we do know of. And that's where we have that 5,000 years of history, and we should be thankful for that. And yeah, so on that note, I might just leave it there. I think Michael's about to come up and call up another speaker. Michael?
There's only off to go.
Okay, well thanks everyone for hanging in.